Hello, parents and families. This is Jessie Zink, Northmont's Gifted Coordinator. This presentation is designed to be a replacement for the meeting that we typically have at the end of the year for all families of students who have been newly identified as gifted and talented. For the most part, if you are here, it's because you're the parent of a current first grader or current second grader, where we do whole grade testing. And this presentation is designed to give you an overview not only of what will happen for your child next year, but also what will happen throughout their time at Northmont. So first of all, let's start with what does it mean to be gifted. So I have on the screen the definition from National Association of Gifted Children of what it means for gifted, but it is essentially students who are in the top 5% either for ability or for aptitude. So aptitude is sort of like you can think of almost like an IQ. Ability is more of like those areas like reading or math. In the state of Ohio, we actually identify students in 7 different areas of giftedness. A child can be identified in all or just one of these areas or anything in between. The first is superior cognitive ability. So if you're the parent of a current second grader, that's more than likely why you are listening to this. We do test students for superior cognitive ability in both second and fourth grade. Those students, the easiest comparison is that is sort of a measure of IQ, although the testing that we use is not IQ testing, it's cognitive ability testing. We also test students and identify students in the areas of reading, math, science, and social studies. So if you're the parent of a first grader, more than likely you're listening to this because your child has been identified as gifted in reading, math, or both. We do test for this in first grade and in fifth grade. We test for science and social studies in sixth grade because we do not provide gifted service for students in science and social studies until middle school. We also screen students for creative thinking. This happens at the same time we test them for superior cognitive ability, so second grade and fourth grade. And it is a screener that we use for students who have a cognitive score of a 111 or above. And finally, we do test students for visual and performing arts, giftedness in music or drama or dance. We do this based on referral only. We actually have used the Montgomery County Educational Service Center to help us with the screening and testing that goes along with that. So just some kind of, just as a brief overview of some characteristics of gifted children. And I feel like every time I give this presentation to parents, usually there are several that walk out and say, oh, that's why it is. So just so you have some idea, these are obviously generalities. So it's not that your child may have all of these characteristics and they may have only a few of them, but generally speaking, these are things that we see over and over in gifted students. So an excellent memory, large vocabulary, longer attention span, or the ability to intensely concentrate on one thing. And that sometimes you'll see that when like a student gets really fixated on learning everything there is to know about one particular thing. Not necessarily that they have this attention span for all things that you would like them to. So that one of the things that we are very aware of as a gifted department within a public school is that often gifted students learn basic skills quickly and with little practice. So the rule of thumb is typically a gifted student can learn a new concept with 1 to 3 repetitions, whereas a typical student needs 8 to 10. And this is a particular area of focus for us because we definitely see students struggle when they're able to learn new concepts with very little practice or repetition, and then they are in classrooms where the vast majority of students need that extra practice, and they're left sort of either doing work that they don't really need to do or making other choices to avoid doing the work that they don't really need to do. So it's definitely something that we can, pay careful attention to and try to address through our service. In addition to those academic characteristics, we also see gifted students have particular social and emotional characteristics. So a couple that I really wanted to highlight on this list are you often will see gifted students are highly sensitive. So almost as though their reaction to a situation is it takes you aback a little bit because it's not what you would expect given the situation and your ability to understand that situation as an adult. And that kind of goes along with that deep, intense feelings and reactions. And again, that's sort of one of the things that we really work on within our gifted program is helping students process their emotions and know how to deal with them appropriately. Um, Skipping down a little bit, that probing questions and curiosity, that too can be, it's an awesome characteristic. Sometimes it isn't always because we're dealing with children. It doesn't always come across the way a child intends it to. So I taught gifted students for many years before coming into this role, and I always would joke because you have to be very comfortable as a teacher with pretty much everyone in your classroom just questioning everything you're doing. And generally, it's just out of their own curiosity and the way they are thinking. But sometimes it comes across as a student questioning a teacher. So again, that's something that we're really aware of and try to address that with students and also with teachers. That unusual sense of humor or putting things together that are not typical, very, very common with gifted students as well. So those are kind of the characteristics, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but this I think is a really interesting graphic, both as a parent and as an educator, about, we have these really great characteristics, but how those might translate into some areas of struggle for a gifted student are listed there in red. So that acquires and retains new information quickly, impatient with the slowness of others, dislikes routine and drill, may resist mastering foundational skills. So like the gifted student who's just brilliant at math but will not do their basic facts, and makes concepts unduly complex. So this is, being aware of not only the characteristic of this child, but also how that might impact that child is super important, both as a parent and as an educator, as I said. I always like to look at that, that love of truth, equity, and fair play. So that one is particularly interesting to me. You often see gifted students are very, very worried about equity and about things being fair. And it comes across as, again, sometimes that like almost unreasonably upsetness when something isn't perceived as fair. That last one is something that I'm going to touch on several times during this presentation, but thinks critically, has high expectations, is self-critical, and evaluates others. That in particular, that characteristic can lead to perfectionism, which can be very debilitating for students. So as I said, we'll talk about perfectionism a little bit more later, but is often a characteristic that gifted students struggle with and can present itself in many different ways. Going on to the next page, so that intense concentration, long attention span in areas of interest and goal-directed behavior, that I think is probably something you might see both in the classroom and at home. So that resists interruption. So when you are focused in and dialed in on doing one thing or wanting to do that one thing, just really not wanting to be interrupted or stopped from doing that, is often something that we see. And that high energy, alertness, eagerness, periods of intense efforts, you see that might disrupt other schedules, that need for continual stimulation, that is also something that we see often with students. So as I said, we are, as gifted educators, very aware of these characteristics and very used to accommodating for them. And we're also used to being the advocate for those students within their other classes. So take a look at these. Let me know, obviously, if you have any questions. But as I said, many times when we go through these with parents, there sort of is this like almost sense of relief that what you are seeing at home or at school maybe isn't, it has been experienced by by others. And actually, we're pretty used to most of these things. So I talked a little bit about perfectionism, and I did want to speak to a real focus for our department is on developing a growth mindset. So I gave you a definition there about what growth mindset is, but basically it's that belief that struggle and productive struggle really do actually improve your ability and aptitude in any subject area. And this is really, really hard for gifted students to develop because oftentimes work that is presented for all students is very easy for them, so they never have that productive struggle. And once, when you've been going, you know, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, however long in school, and you've never had a struggle, when you encounter it, you don't always have the skills necessary to cope with that, either academically or emotionally. So this is something that we actually have students set yearly goals related to, in addition to their academic goals. But fixed mindset, the belief that you are as smart as you are going to be, really is tied quite closely to perfectionism. And as I said, we see perfectionism in a lot of ways. So we see it as the student who will never quit on a task because they can't get it perfect. We see it as the student who has just huge emotional meltdowns because they aren't getting something perfect. And we also see it as a student who will not start work because they don't think they can get it perfect. And all of those things are not helpful at school or in life. So as I said, this is a great focus for our department in helping students be more self-aware of what growth mindset means. And I would also encourage you to really maybe do a little bit of reading or research on this, because I have found that as a parent, emphasizing growth mindset is very important. When you're thinking about your child's grades, for example. So I was raised with the expectation that I would have A's on everything because that was my ability, and I should always be living up to my ability. And I don't know that that's necessarily, it does not, that kind of expectation does not always promote a growth mindset. It sometimes can really hurt students, especially if they are struggling with that perfectionism. So just your approach to, what happens if you don't get an A? How do you as a parent respond? How should they as a student respond? And really kind of reconsidering that, because the hope is that we're providing students with work and tasks that are not easy for them to get A's on all the time. So taking a look at service, I've now alluded to it several times. Second and third grade, depending on who you are the parent of. So in second grade, we have students who are gifted in reading and math, and we deliberately group those students into a regular classroom based on their area of identification. So for example, we might have a classroom teacher, and in her homeroom, she has 5 students who are all identified as gifted in reading. And that is essentially a small group that enables that teacher to meet with that small group and provide a small group instruction at the level those students are all at. We might have another classroom teacher who has a group of 4 students who are identified as both gifted in reading and gifted in math. And so obviously that teacher is then able to provide that small group instruction in both areas. And we are very specific about how we group those students based on their areas of identification. The classroom teacher is the service provider, but that classroom teacher has access to resources that are gathered by an intervention specialist. The third grade reading sort of follows the same model for second grade, again with that cluster grouping of gifted readers in one reading class. But things get a little different beyond third grade. So we have 2 sort of main pathways for service at the elementary level. Our STEM program is for students who are gifted in superior cognitive ability, which again we identify in second and fourth grade, math, or creative thinking. It's students in grades 3 through 6, and those students meet 45 minutes a day with a gifted intervention specialist. It takes the place of their science class, although it pulls in high-level math skills, science standards, problem-solving standards, a multitude of things that are covered in the class. And it is based on project-based learning. The green class or green program is for students who are gifted in reading. This runs grades 4 through 6. So 45 minutes a week, students meet face to face with a